that's under a minute per question, so I'll go quickly.
Maybe we'll stretch it up to 10.
Okay. Well, that's just over a minute per question. So,
That's the way it is.
Palestine and anti-Semitism. It is true to say that there is a series of controversies, including inside Momentum's own ranks, about Israel-Palestine, about that sort of stuff. We don't have an official policy on Israel-Palestine or anything like that. We don't try to. I wouldn't actually support us taking a position one way or another on two states, one state, or BDS, not BDS. I don't think that's what we exist to do. It is true to say that there has been a campaign against Jeremy Corbyn to essentially imply that he's an anti-Semite. However, I think that it is incumbent upon the left to be careful about this question, to the extent that I think there are issues about how we express ourselves around the issue of Israel-Palestine, not to water down any of the politics at all, but there have been controversies inside Momentum where I think we can't just dismiss it as a Zionist threat to Jeremy Corbyn. If there are anti-Semitic remarks made or whatever it is, they need to be tackled as well. So it's about just being clear. For us, it's about holding the political line around Palestine without, but also taking seriously the charge of anti-Semitism where it crops up. But yeah, you're certainly right to say that there is a coordinated attempt to paint him as an anti-Semite for his politics on Palestine. And to dredge up that one clip of him talking about Hamas as his friends, when of course he's invited people to a meeting, he's calling everyone his friends. But student stuff. Interestingly, I've only been across the Atlantic once before, which was also to Toronto, also in winter, and I was flown across to speak at a CFS Ontario conference. So. I actually don't think I'm the best person to give you advice on organising, because I kind of think the student movements in different countries are so different. I mean, for us, the Canadian or the Quebecois student movement was incredibly influential and inspiring. So much so that if you walk around a campus in the UK, you'll see lots of red squares. Let's talk offline, because I can't do it in under a minute. There was a question on nuclear weapons and NATO, and this is where we get into hot water, because the Labour Party has a policy to support the renewal of nuclear deterrent and support continued membership of NATO. Jeremy Corbyn may well disagree with those policies, but for the moment, and this is a broader question that's opening up for Momentum, he has taken, or the leadership collectively has taken, a compromise. He's not arguing for nuclear deterrent, but it is likely, I would imagine, that if our manifesto were drawn up tomorrow, that it would include the renewal of a nuclear deterrent, because that's Labour Party policy, which we haven't yet overturned at conference. Barriers to overturning that are the unions, primarily, who back Trident renewal, Trident submarine renewal, because of the jobs that are involved. And this is a broader question, and it goes for issues like the Snoopers Charter, where I think we made a tactical error by not voting against it all the way through. Should Momentum ever criticise, should the grassroots ever criticise the leadership openly? Should we take a position that's different to Jeremy Corbyn if he makes a compromise on NATO membership or nuclear deterrent? My view is yes, we should. My view is yes, we should. We should have at least basic policy-making processes to do that. I think our experience of Tsipras and Greece should tell us that the grassroots needs to sort of have a handle on its leadership. But the fact is that on a lot of complex questions, especially around things like the monarchy, foreign policy, defence policy, we are in a weak position inside the party, and the leadership is unable to fully express itself on those questions until we've won those debates inside the party. Whereas on social and economic questions, we have a much freer rein. We can get away with doing much more. I don't know how much time I've got left.
You've got lots, go ahead.
Okay. Ireland and Scotland, the Labour Party opposes Scottish independence, formally speaking. I think Jeremy Corbyn actually does oppose Scottish independence. It's not just a question of that being a party line and him not being able to say anything publicly about it. And obviously on the question of Ireland, Jeremy Corbyn and his allies have always been quite strong in favour of the rights of and in favour of a united Ireland, and have done a lot of campaigning for civil rights for those victimised by the British state, etc., etc. Scotland's a difficult question for the Labour Party because we are being hammered there, and the whole of Scottish politics is now split along pro-independence and anti-independence lines. And what that has created is actually, I would argue, quite a conservative, although the whole political spectrum in Scotland is a long way to the left of where it is in England, it's created quite a conservative, almost nationalist division. And obviously as socialists we don't want to be talking about independence or, Scotland. I mean, I'm from Scotland, I'm from Edinburgh. I don't think that Scotland's an oppressed nation. I don't think it was conquered by England. It doesn't have the same relationship as Ireland does. It's more complicated than that. So Scotland is a problem for us. Again, I'm not sure what detail to go into on that. Other than to say that I suppose a lot of the grassroots of Corbyn's movement is divided on Scotland, whether or not Scotland should be independent, and that in the coming years it is very likely, in my view, that Scotland will become independent because of Brexit, and Scotland being so overwhelmingly opposed to Brexit and being given the choice between being a member of the United Kingdom and being a member of Europe. I think they'd probably choose Europe. On Brexit, the Labour left historically is a Eurosceptic tradition. Eurosceptic in the sense of opposing EU membership, certainly opposing things like the Lisbon Treaty. Ultimately, Jeremy Corbyn and the leadership came round to campaigning for remaining in the EU, I think rightly, because what they recognised was that the EU referendum was not about the EU. It was about immigration, it was about the resurgence of social conservatism. Brexit and the forces that brought it about are the British franchise of the nationalist international that includes Donald Trump and Marine Le Pen and all of the rest of them. This was not about EU membership, this was about safeguarding people's rights and resisting right-wing populism. And about staking out a kind of internationalism in an increasingly nationalist atmosphere. And Jeremy Corbyn fought very hard for Remain in the end. He was out on the stump pretty much every night throughout that campaign. Energy. Energy policy is very interesting and it's, I think, very good. What we've gone for is not just sort of a nationalisation or public ownership of the big six energy companies, which are privatised, but also community energy. So locally run, community-run energy, or renewable energy, which I think is a really good policy, and the strongest commitments to keeping the Paris Climate Agreement. I forget which percentage of our power we're saying will produce by renewables by 2025, but it's really big. It's a very, very big, ambitious, good green policy that Corbyn has come out with. I think that was it. Have I missed anyone?
I think you're covering it all. Okay, yes, just a second, I'll be back again. And remember, folks, we've only have minutes.
I'll be as quick as I can, and I'll go in the order they were asked. So the old and new left, which I think was an interesting question, and I think that it's important to make a distinction between the old and new left. Doesn't necessarily mean old people who are left wing and young people who are left wing. It's also about the backgrounds they come from. And I think that there's a big problem in Momentum and the Labour left in general at the moment, which is trying to sort of claim the new politics. So when internal debates go on into, how should we be structured? Should we have a delegate conference to organise Momentum, which we'll be having in February, or maybe early March, or should we do all of our business through online votes? People sort of claim the new politics and say online votes is the new politics. But actually, the new politics and the old politics are very, very complex in terms of how they map onto each other, and they mean lots of different things in lots of different scenarios. And I absolutely agree with you that what we don't want to happen is for the old left to sit around and continue to do procedures, and I love procedural motions, But I'm also a social movement veteran, and I love doing grassroots organising on lots of other fronts as well. We need these two groups to merge with each other. Actually, we need all of the young people who've just come out of social movements to learn how to do the Labour Party's bureaucracy. And we need to train a new generation of people in doing that. And we need all of the people who've been doing the party bureaucracy forever to learn from and understand where everyone else has come from. So, in other words, the answer to the new and the old politics is very much to essentially destroy the categories. And one of our greatest tasks is to make that happen. Next came the question which, as a former press officer on the leadership campaign, I would advise myself not to answer. What happens if we lose? Which of course we won't, and that's the answer. I am going to answer it. Well, the fact is that we have an absolutely enormous left-wing majority inside the Labour Party now. They are members and they are not going anywhere, and gradually they're getting more and more involved. And, one of our biggest tasks over the next few years is to ensure that all of those new members become active in their local parties and not just sort of click a button online for the leader, which is to an extent what some of them have been doing. And we need to get them active in their local parties, but also in local communities and grassroots movements, etc., etc. Will face challenges if Jeremy Corbyn has to resign. I mean, he's not immortal. There will come a time when Jeremy Corbyn can no longer be leader of the Labour Party, and at that point we will need to have enough MPs that we can get onto the ballot paper. You need 15% of the parliamentary Labour Party to be able to nominate you. And at the moment we only got Jeremy Corbyn onto the ballot paper initially because we lobbied right-wing Labour MPs to sign his nomination papers so that we could have a debate. They regretted that. So we need more left-wing Labour MPs to get a new candidate onto the ballot paper. But the long and the short of it is that the Labour Party is on the left, and that's probably where it's going to stay, providing that we can get onto the ballot paper if Jeremy Corbyn ceases to be leader at any point. Whether that's in 2025 after he's been Prime Minister for 5 years, or whether that's in next year if something terrible happens. Then that's our task. Immigration, and this is my favourite topic because it is the headline topic in the UK at the moment. Look, yes, you can argue on some levels that immigration causes surplus labour. So did the fact that women went to work. You know, we didn't oppose that so. Rich borders are like capitalism. They only exist for poor people. The rich get socialism and a borderless world, and they can move about wherever they want. Without freedom of movement, which the EU provided, and which we should fight for that to extend beyond the EU as well. Freedom of movement is a luxury that is enjoyed by rich people. Freedom of movement is a right that has been won for working class people. And yes, it is a product, to a large extent, of it being useful for capitalists to have access to labour all over the world. But capitalism is a contradictory system, and many of the rights that we enjoy come from the capitalist system. You know, the welfare state was created in the UK just before the First World War because the Liberal government at the time realised that its people were so sick that it couldn't conscript them to fight. That's why it started to create the beginnings of the welfare state. The capitalist system produces all kinds of things. And we have to relocate the problem of immigration. You know, the fact that you can't get a job or the fact that you can't get a house is a social and an economic problem. It is a lack of state investment. It is not a problem of immigration. And we have to redefine the terms of those debates, because actually if you try to compete by saying we will introduce new and innovative border controls, or we will shut the borders to immigrants, we will never win, because the right will always do better with voters who care about those things. We have to persuade people of a different way of looking at the problem. It's also in the UK at least. Sorry, I know I'm eating into time here.
You got 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. But actually, it hasn't caused a significant deflation of wages. It caused a 0.3% decrease in wages for every 10 percentage points. That is 10% growing to 20%, not 10% growing to 11%. of migrants in a specific sector. So it's actually its deflationary effect on wages is absolutely marginal. It's much more relevant that the labour movement was destroyed and the union density is very low. Renationalising the railways, what else would we renationalise? I think we're talking much more, I think actually we talk much more in terms of common ownership and in terms of mutual ownership. Cooperatives, these things sound fluffier, but they're also about a reaction against top-down state control, which I think is healthy. I think it's healthy that we're talking about workers' control and community control over things like energy and all the rest of it. We don't have a shopping list of all the things that we want to nationalise. We don't go into nationalise the top 100 companies. But I'm sure that the non-private sector of the economy would grow substantially under a Corbyn government. How is the left organised and recognised? Operations and conventions. This is something that we're really still working out in Momentum. So historically, the Labour left is quite fractured, actually very small. Probably, the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, which is where John Landsman, who set up Momentum, that's where he came from. Probably held national conferences much smaller than this, and would organise a Labour Party conference. It would hand out bulletins of which motions you should vote for, etc. In general, there isn't a lot of recognition. Party conference is a very corporate space. To get any area, to get any fringe inside the building costs tens of thousands of pounds, or it really doesn't. It costs a lot of money. So what we've done actually recently, Momentum is trying to be the hub of all of the left's organising for conference. We missed a trip because we were so focused on the leadership campaign this year, but next year, next September, which was the next party conference, we hope to have a much greater number of delegates. We were actually in a minority at this year's conference, which was a big mistake. So we lost some votes. But what we've done is, for instance, to create huge festivals, which is what the Labour Party conference used to be like, called the World Transformed, which I know some people may have heard of, which is this huge kind of festival of arts, culture and politics, which lots of very dedicated volunteers set up on behalf of Momentum about half a mile away from the conference venue, where we could organise, have our own spaces, and thousands of people came to that. I really don't have much time to answer the remaining questions. Very briefly, I can't comment on who the great prophets of our era are, though it's prompted something on my head, though JC is a good initial.
John Cleese.
John Cleese is the prophet. An update on Brexit and parliamentary sovereignty. I actually work on this because I work for an organisation called Another Europe is Possible, and we're the Radical Remain campaign, and we are now the sort of pro-free movement campaign. There is currently basically the government is fighting for the power to make Brexit happen on its own without asking Parliament. It's fighting for this really hard and taking it all the way to the Supreme Court, which is now hearing the case. On the law, they will probably lose that. But there's a question about how Labour treats the vote in Parliament to implement what is called Article 50, which is the piece of law that you need to implement to leave the European Union. Because what we want to do, obviously what we should be doing, is putting down amendments to that and say, yes, we'll leave the EU, but we're having freedom of movement, we're keeping the workers' rights associated with the EU, we're keeping the environmental protections, basically all of our environmental protections are bound up in EU law, etc., etc. So there's a tactical question about that and how the Labour leadership deals with it, which I don't have time to talk about properly. And finally, how is all of this linked together in a global way? I've kind of touched on that already. But the world is polarising, and there has to be from the ashes of decades of irrelevance that so much of the left has found itself in across the Western world, we have to form a new radical axis that can counter the world of Trump and Marine Le Pen and the rest of it. And if we don't, the bad guys will win, and not just the normal kind of bad guys. And it's an emergency, and we've got to be willing to act in a creative way, act quickly, and act like it's an emergency. Actually, unless the left takes over social democratic parties all across the Western world, we could be in a really bad situation, The Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet order ended very quickly. Who's to say that liberal democracy might not end very quickly?
Right.
And not in the right direction?
Yeah.
And on that cheery note, I will end.
Apologize to everybody if they didn't, get everything answered. I think